We're driving through the neighborhood where I was born and raised. This is the Boyle Heights section of East Los Angeles. From the belly of the California prison system to these streets, I became a career criminal operating on behalf of the Mexican Mafia, La EME. In this vast area, encompassing several gang neighborhoods, we created a foundation of dealers who readily dispensed our drugs. I was also one of the primary people responsible for killing anyone who got in our way. My name is Mundo Mendoza, also known as Mundo. I am a former Mexican Mafia member who once specialized in murder, and I am here to talk to you about my life.
Mundo, you mentioned that when you were 19 years old, you killed your first individual, and it was with a machete. You almost basically chopped his head off, right, with a machete. You went to prison, you became a member of the Mexican Mafia, you were probably involved in several other homicides that you either talked about or you didn't talk about. So now you get out, you're connected with Joe Morgan. Tell us about the homicides that you committed freshly getting out, because after reading your book, I mean, there were several homicides. Okay. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. With the Mexican Mafia and just about any prison gang, the way you demonstrate your loyalty to your organization, the number one manner of displaying your loyalty is by killing. So the more people you kill, especially on an ongoing basis, the more you continue to demonstrate your loyalty to your organization. This was something that I had the intestinal fortitude now to carry out, especially since I was involved in several in prison. Mm-hmm. And so now I'm on the streets and I'm like a kid in a candy store. The easy thing for me on the streets, that's so easy. That was our number one tool of enforcement, is murder. Take somebody out, don't look back, and and on and on. And I think everybody in my world as a criminal, everybody that I killed, whether it's in prison or on the streets, had a killing coming. Now, as I say that, I know everybody's people out there, viewers, are going to want to jump all over me. I'm talking from the mindset of a bad guy, of a gang member, of a demented career criminal. Everybody that I killed was part of the game, and they did something to merit their demise. So they had a killing coming. The Mexican Mafia in general collectively look at the killing of innocent people as unacceptable. They don't like collateral damage. They strive to isolate their targets. Killing women is distasteful for me. Killing old people, killing infants, to me it's an act of cowardice.
Did you ever kill any women?
I did. She burned us for some dope, and excuse me as I navigate through this because I'm being careful for the cold case guys that may be viewing. So this female had betrayed us, had taken some dope and some money from us, and we received word that she needed to be taken out. So we had her in rush hour traffic in a vehicle. She was a little leery, and she was in the car with us. I tried to shoot her. I say try, is when I produced the weapon, she moved her body like she jerked in anticipation of getting hurt. And so a round went into her body. And before I could finish her off, we're in an industrial area where there's people coming out on a break, a lunch break, I believe it was. So suddenly we find ourselves in a situation where we can't continue firing. I can't continue shooting into her and finish her off. All I could do was hug her tightly to keep her from squirming or whatever. I had her held tightly, and she was begging that I kill her. All I could think of was, this woman has balls. No male member has ever died as valiantly as this female. I'm not a torturing kind of guy. I'm the kind of guy that if you've got to go, I want to take your lights out as soon as I can. Okay, take you out of your misery. So as we're driving, we find ourselves in rush hour traffic. And there's a guy in a big rig looking from his vantage point. He's got a good view of the inside of the car because he's elevated, looking down. And so I pretend like I'm kissing her, and I could see the corner of my eye, the guy has a leer in his face. You know, he's like, oh, wow, I got a good view here of these guys making out, you know. So, and I remember, and I'm in my mind, I'm trying to will his eyes away. You know, like, don't look because I don't want you to see the blood, you know, or any of this, yes. Right? So then we finally got away. We got her to a location where we were able to prop her and put the gun in her mouth and fire and finish her.
Finish her, yeah.
So that was distasteful for me because it was a woman, and nobody, you know, wants to kill a woman. But you got to remember that the caliber of women are such that they are just as evil as the guys. So when they're part of that world and they chose that to be in that game, the Mexican Mafia does not discriminate by gender. They want equal opportunity, they got it, especially in those days. And when I say they got it, is if you screw up, no one's going to take into account that you were a female. You know, you're part of the game, you broke the rules, you're gone. I spent most of my 6.5 years in prison for the murder of Bobby Loco at San Quentin. Upon my release, I immediately hooked up with one of the most notorious Mexican Mafia members, and together we launched the EME street operations. Spreading the EME gospel is what I called it. The distribution of illegal drugs, heroin and cocaine primarily, and committing multiple homicides became our calling card as we formed our version of Murder Incorporated on the streets of LA.
Mundo, I want to ask you a series of questions about your relationship with Joe Pegleg Morgan. To start, why don't you tell us a little bit about his background?
Joe Morgan is of Slavic descent. He was born in the Los Angeles area, raised in a Hispanic barrio, was a member of the Maravilla gang. At the age of approximately 15 years old, he committed his first homicide, was convicted, sent to the Department of Corrections, did his time, was released, was involved in a bank robbery where he robbed a bank using a machine gun, pretty much established a solid reputation in and out of the criminal justice system. During an escape attempt, sometime in the 60s, he cut his leg, and they patched him up, but gangrene set in. He lost his leg, and that's how he got the nickname Peg Leg, although the nickname was something that was given by the media and law enforcement. Inmates did not call him Peg Leg. They simply called him Joe, or Cocolizo. Cocolizo because he was bald-headed. So Coco is a slang word for your head, and liso is a word for smooth, so smooth head. So Joe through the years developed a lot of respect, and in 1968 he was sponsored by Acha, Mike Eisen at Folsom Prison, and he was recruited into the Mexican Mafia.
And when did you first meet him, and how did that relationship progress to when you got out in the streets?
Yeah. Joe Morgan I met in 1975. He was living in Burbank. He had an apartment in Burbank. He was actually living with one of the Manson girls. Her name was Maria Alonso. They called her Crystal. And he had inherited her. And I hate the way it sounds, but this is exactly how it happened. He was a good friend of an Aryan Brotherhood member named Bobby Hedberg. And they were in Folsom together, and Bobby Hedberg was corresponding with Crystal. And so when Joe Morgan was about to be released on parole, Bobby told him, hey, you know, here's I'm going to let you have the pink slip to my girl, to one of my girls. He gave her Crystal to have as his property. So he was living with her, and you know, it was a physical relationship, and The first time I met him, Crystal was there, and Sailor and I, Sailor was my fellow Mexican Mafia member. We went over to visit him and to discuss business and getting things launched on the streets, and Crystal was there, and so this is how, this was the first time that I met Joe. And so when we met up in 1975 on the streets, he had already attained a very good reputation, not only as a killer, having killed a couple of people on the outside as well. More important to the fellas, he had established some big drug connections that now allowed the fellas, the Mexican Mafia, to enjoy a major supplier of heroin and cocaine, but mostly heroin, during the formative street years of the 1970s. When I hooked up with Joe, that was the time to establish operations throughout the state of California and especially in LA. So historically, Joe Morgan is considered the most influential Mexican Mafia member that's ever existed. He was respected by the old fellas and by the younger guys as well.
It's my understanding that within the Italian Mafia, less than 1% of its members ever become an actual made member. And although there is no godfather within the Mexican Mafia, can you explain to our audience what rank, so to speak, did Joe Pegleg Morgan have in the Mexican Mafia, and what relationship did you have with him?
So the Mexican Mafia does not have a formal structure. Unlike other groups, it's an informal structure, and the best example I can give you of how leadership is demonstrated, if you think of a jury, when you pick a jury and you pick a foreman or a foreperson, everybody else defers that leadership role, and from that group of 12 emerges a foreman. The same thing with the Mexican Mafia. People deferred to Joe because he was a moneymaker. He represented lots of drugs, consequently lots of money. So people, including myself, we sought to insulate him. We wanted him insulated because that's where the money's coming from. You don't want the cash cow out there pulling triggers. So that was my relationship with him. Is during the streets operations in 1975, I became his right-hand man. I became the voice of logic, of establishing organized criminal structure by using murder as a tool. And I created an inner circle, which included 4 or 5 of us that were money makers, guys that were interested in moving forward and not just shooting heroin in our veins. I became one of the hitters, and so we went out and we did the killings. This is before we ever embraced the use of street gangs. We did our own hits, we did our own killings, and it was probably dumb. It was probably not a good business move because some of us needed to be insulated. And Joe would always encourage me not to go out and do the hits, to get somebody else to do them. But I looked at that as a form of weakness. I was a gangbanger, okay? And it's a bottom line. I was a very proficient guy as a criminal, but business logic, I didn't possess it for some reason, because I guess I felt that my calling, my specialty was killing people. And so that's what I did. And I ultimately got arrested for 2 homicides and left Joe out with the other guys, and they continued.
At some point you decided, I believe you brought in or developed an idea to bring the drug culture into submission under the Mexican Mafia. Is that right?
That was the foundation that we laid, the foundation of fear, foundation of establishing dealerships, people to sell our drugs. We had an unlimited supply. Our main guy, his name was Chuy Araujo. Before they called them cartels, they called them families. So Jesus Araujo was the head of the Araujo family.
The little research that I've done on Jesus Araujo, and it's basically revealed that he was like the Chapo Guzman of Tijuana, Baja California, Sur and Norte. Tell us a little bit about Jesus Araujo, where you met him, where you would meet, how much heroin he was bringing across, and what type of impact his heroin had in the barrio in East LA.
Joe Morgan's vision was to use his contacts south of the border to start a program for the Mexican Mafia on this side of the border. And so this is what attracted me to meeting with Joe, sitting down with him, and ironing out the business at hand. So the first Mexican drug trafficking guy that we met of significance was a guy named Jesus Araujo, nicknamed Chewy. So that's kind of like how we knew him. Chewy, who was the head of the Araujo family. And as you mentioned, that's what they called them back then. They didn't refer to each other as cartels. And so Chewy, the first time I met Chewy was in Newport Beach. We were at a lodging of, I think it was a Hobo Joe lodging that Joe Morgan, when he was on the run, where he was staying. And so we rendezvoused there and had some tequila. Jody cooked some spaghetti for us. That was Joe Morgan's wife. And we talked business. And basically what Chewy told us was that he would supply us with as much heroin as we could move, and that the quality would be consistent. And I remember asking him about cocaine. Joe wasn't interested in cocaine, and really I wasn't either, because we really didn't have those kind of customers. Ours were predominantly heroin customers. And but I asked him anyway, and he said yes, whatever you need in that. So that's how that relationship started. The quality, he said, would never change. He told us how many times we could step on it if we wanted to step on it, or we could sell it that way, whatever. That was our business. So we agreed, and the amounts were unlimited. And we had facilitators. We had people that would bring things across the border, bring the drugs across the border. We had, Joe had established a relationship with, I don't know if you heard of, was a connected man.
He was Italian?
Yes, he was Italian, and he was connected with the East Coast guys, the mob. And so Joe would use facilitators who would use automobiles with false panels that were acquired through, they were Toyota vehicles. And then of course Joe coordinated the men and women who would do the smuggling, and then we had stash houses where we had the drugs. And my job was to set up the EME members that were dispersed throughout the state, and get them involved in the program. Those that wanted to be profitable, those that had the business acumen. Like I said, Joe was very bummed out about the dead weight we had in the organization. He did not want to activate Chewy and then have the fellas come up short, burn him, and then we would lose a lucrative contact. So it was my idea to start what I called an inner circle. And I explained it to him, look, we're not rebelling against anybody. What we're doing is we're excluding the dead weight for a particular time frame, allowing us to get on our feet. And then once everybody's working successfully, making money, and we feel that we can absorb losses, minimal losses, then we'll front dope, quantities of dope to some of the dead weight. And I'll tell them up front, when you come back with the money for the dope that we fronted you, you pay us for that dope, and you pay us for the next batch. You should be in a position where you can pay for your next batch. If you come up short, or if you don't pay, instead of killing you, we're not going to supply you anymore. Consider yourself fortunate. Go make your moves however you want to make them, but don't count on us anymore. And remember that we could have killed you. So I'm explaining this to Joe in Burbank in his apartment, and he's loving it. In fact, I remember him telling me one day, well, shit, I'd have to kill half the clica who doesn't report with the proceeds. He says, and I can't do that, and it doesn't make sense.
Mundo, was Joe a heroin user?
I thought he wasn't. The only Mexican Mafia members in my time frame that did not use heroin were Matt Carrillo from San Diego, one of my co-sponsors, myself, Robot, and I thought Joe Morgan. Okay, so up until this point, 1975, these four members are notorious for not being heroin users. I'm one of them. I come to find out that he was using heroin and he didn't want me to know. I looked up to the fact that he was a non-user. It would have burst my bubble, but that doesn't stop us from continuing in business because he had the contacts. So he saw that I felt an affinity to him because he was a non-user just like me. And in fact, he complimented me for being a non-user. He said, that's a lot of discipline, you have a good head, blah, blah, blah. So Joe asked Sailor, who was my close Mexican Mafia associate and a fellow gang member, he asked Sailor on the side to bring him a little bit of heroin so that he could get well. This is while we're establishing this thing with Chewy. Mm-hmm. And so Sailor brought him the dope, and then Sailor confided in me later that he was using, but now he's trying to get well.
Did it blow your bubble?
It bursted my bubble temporarily, but again, I'm a very pragmatic person, and I was flattered that he cared enough about what I thought about him to try to conceal that from me. Entering another barrio's turf could ignite big trouble, like when I killed Bobby Loco from White Fence. The boundaries that once separated rival gangs back in the day, that carried vital significance, suddenly ceased to exist and no longer matter. As a representative of the Mexican Mafia, the rules of engagement had now changed. It's curious because there was a love-hate relationship between V&E and White Fence. As a youngster growing up, of course, the hatred was the rivalry, the fact that we were two separate nations, so to speak, fighting against each other, warring against each other. And then as we got older and started doing time in prison, we became close friends. In fact, when I became a Mexican Mafia member, who were my main dealers when we started off? People from White Fence. Faithful, loyal, and yet they were from a rival gang. When the mentality graduates from street gang to prison gang, the parameters change. The dynamics changes. It transforms into a bigger picture, making money. That's where the emphasis is. The youngsters are put in line, and they're made to understand that, hey, you're talking to a big homie here. So the big homie, his word is gold. This was a case of the supply far exceeding the demand, which is a good problem to have. So as we were building our customer base, our dealers, our Mexican Mafia members throughout the state, the dope was there. Now we had to develop it. That was the important thing, is that we had brothers that were ready, and we had the one major connection. And so my role in laying the foundation at that time was hand in hand working with Joe. Our version of Murder Incorporated was one in which, when we started replacing the dealers, I was like a sales rep. I didn't bully anybody. I didn't go in there threatening anybody. I talked to different dealers, and I let them know that they were now going to be selling our dope, and this is how it's going to work. And I lay out the program that I had, and those who resisted, it was easier for us to kill them than to assault them or to beat them up or something like that. We figured that's a waste of time. Let's kill them, and then let's replace them. So that's what we did. We initiated a campaign of installing our own dealers and killing the resistors. And it became very demented when you think of the mindset because I can remember at least 2 occasions where Sailor and I, sometimes Alfie was with us, Alfie Sosa, we would be in the process of killing somebody. We were very concerned about having the job completed before the Dodger game. The Dodger game would start at 7:30, so we wanted to be there around 6:30 to see all the preliminary stuff and batting practice. So our time frame was predicated during those times on a Dodger game. And then we'd be at the game eating Dodger dogs and laughing about the victim we had just taken out. And so, I mean, this was, for us, it was just a very demented mindset. The Mexican Mafia Drug Foundation, established by Joe Morgan and I in the 1970s, has been taken to another level and still functioning today. While we were undertaking the formation of a drug legacy, I still made time to avenge the death of Cheyenne by hunting down and taking out the Reyes brothers in the city of Bakersfield.